Introduce Al Young, who just recently finished his 3-year term as California's Poet Laureate. In addition to being a poet, novelist, and essayist, Young is also an educator and has taught poetry, fiction writing, and American literature at a number of universities. He is highly decorated and has received almost every honor imaginable, including the Guggenheim, Wallace Stegner, and several New York Times Notable Book of the Year citations. And the list just continues. He's here today to talk to us about his collection of poetry, Something About the Blues. Poet Langston Hughes was the first to popularize the blues as a poetic form. According to Hughes, the blues were born as poetry sung by working men to share their stories of hard-luck lives and tough times. Like Langston Hughes, Al Young has written about the blues, played the blues, and drawn inspiration from the blues. His collection of poetry uses the blues as a theme throughout 100 new and previously published poems, which Al Young will be reading for us today. So without further ado, we're pleased to welcome Al Young.
Thank you. Poetry is something that most people think of as being a medium for personal or subjective expression. In American poetry in particular, or I should say North American poetry, because Canadians do the same thing, the first person, that is the I pronoun, predominates. So people get the idea early on that this is what poetry is for, talking about oneself. I did this, I felt that, you did this to me, I see this, I experience that, I think this, and so forth. This is a fairly new development in human culture. In English-speaking countries, the first person did not predominate in poetry. In fact, rarely raised its head until the Romantics, meaning people like Lord Byron and Percy Bysshe Shelley and John Keats, that bunch. They brought the first person in the wake of the Industrial Revolution in England in the late 18th century. And they brought it in for a particular reason. They believed in science. You know, if you track the word science, and many of you I'm sure are familiar with this, it means knowing, if you take it back to the Latin. And there are many ways of knowing. You know, a poet knows in a certain way. Probably the devoutly mystical person has a way of knowing. We know through love, we know through service, and we know through just plain left brain analysis and rationale. And a lot of these romantic poets thought that science was finally going to break down all of these human limitations and prejudices. And so when they used the I in a big, big sense. They weren't just talking about this little cocoon of flesh that we identify with as oneself, but a much larger, almost cosmic organism. Up until then, poetry had been a vehicle for the expression of just about everything. I think it's one of the original human languages. It does not begin with text, certainly. It doesn't begin with any of these appurtenances that we associate with poetry, but with just human beings, the human body, our 5 senses, and each other. We had each other's ears and presence. So that when we read or when we visit cultures, which are still extant, that use poetry, for example, for the exorcism of demons, or to control the weather, or to ensure that childbirth will be safe, we tend to think of these as superstitions. I tend to think that those who preceded us, our ancestors, were much sharper than we are. They knew a lot of things that seem fanciful to us, and they knew them intimately because they lived rather directly, I like to think, with the natural world, which wasn't just something out there, but of which they themselves saw themselves as a part of. And I think this is the biggest problem that we're having on Earth right now, this concept of the other. Strictly speaking, there is no such thing, and I think that natural phenomena is bringing us to that conclusion reluctantly and rather rapidly. But traditionally, poetry was used to control nature, to commemorate, to memorize 30 days, hath September, April, June, and November, you know, little rhymes like that. You use rhymes because they're mnemonic devices. They enable you to remember things that otherwise might elude you. Used to worship, of course, it's no accident that all of the great religions and their texts or scriptures are rendered in poetry, which is one of the most exquisite of languages. In medieval European universities, you wrote your thesis. If you were pursuing a master's thesis or a doctoral thesis, it was written in poetry. Certainly it was written in verse. This seems quite fanciful now to say this, but that's the way it was. And when you look at the great epics, you look at Homer, or you look at El Cid, the Spanish. These are written in poetry. And there is a very thin membrane that separates, maybe doesn't separate, that brings poetry and music together. These are things that we don't altogether understand yet. A lot of work is being done right now by neuroscientists on the effects of music and musicality on consciousness and on the phenomenal world. I happen to think that sound is probably the most powerful force in existence, and I have reasons for thinking this. One very local one would be the way in which we close prayer, say in the Judeo-Christian world. The Christians say Amen or Amen. The Jews say the same thing. The Muslims say Ameen. And the Hindus say Om. And they're all derived from the same source. According to the Hindus, Om is the sacred sound of the universe. That's all the sounds together. And I'm sure that many of you either have parents or relatives who were hippies back in the 60s who have made you familiar with that particular sound of Om. So poetry to me is magical. It's magical for another reason too. It occupies a space that's somewhere between rational speak or prose speak and musicality. And as you know from this particular title in this book, I write a lot about music because jazz and the blues and vernacular music have played a large role in shaping me. So that it is possible to talk about many things at once in a single poem. It can have many layers of meaning. And whenever times get hard, someone dies, someone's getting married, someone's born, and ceremony is required, that's when poetry always appears, because I think that subconsciously we know that there's something different about poetry than from ordinary discourse. As Poet Laureate, I kept making the point up and down the state and all over the country and the world that if we leave public discourse and if we leave language to the cultivation of corporations and politicians and governments, it will degenerate, and it has degenerated. And it's very hard for people to communicate now with what used to be called received language. When I hear of free trade or enemy combatants or preemptive strike, terms like this, I know that this is not real language. This is language that has been fashioned by a press secretary or someone for the purpose of covering something up or deceiving or steering people off on the wrong track. The best essay on this I read more than 60 years ago. It's by George Orwell, and I recommend it. You can find it online. It's called Politics in the English Language. And in it, Orwell, who wrote 1984, which is receding behind us now, he wrote it in 1948, and he just he saw which way things were going in Western societies, and so he just turned the 4-8 around and made it 1984. But in that essay, among other things, he says the only two words that a government bureaucrat needs to know are yes and no. Poetry fills in everything in between. So let's poeticize. There was a jazz arranger named Tad Dameron who wrote a lot of things for the great Dizzy Gillespie, whom you've probably heard of, one of the modern jazz pioneers. And he wrote a song many years ago called The Squirrel. And it goes like this. What up, bum, bum, ba-dum, bum, da 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 da. What up, bum, bum, ba-dum, bum, bum. What up, bum, bum, ba-dum, bum, bum, bum. In other words, at the end of each of those passages, you get an accumulative rhythm, and it goes into the second chorus. You'd get ba-dup, bump, bump, ba-dum, bump, 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 bump. And he said that he had thought of this song while he was sitting in Central Park in the 1940s in New York, watching squirrels gather nuts and go away to squirrel them away, as we say. Well, I didn't know that when I wrote this poem. I didn't know how he had written that. I knew the song. But one morning when I lived in Palo Alto, in my neighborhood there were these black squirrels, which I'd never seen before. I'd only known the brown variety. And they woke me up one morning, and this is the poem that ensued. Squirrels. Squirrels are skittering outside through the trees of my bedroom window, laying it on the line of my consciousness. Brown and black, furry and scurrying, how can I not help loving them like an old bobster loves licks laid down, building up so many beats to the moment? Squirrels may be crazy, but they aren't dullards. They like to play too. They can't be hustling nuts and hoard all the time like everybody else. They love a good chase now and again. Swishing through branch leaves, drumming on my diamond roof, the shining young squirrels are making and saving the day. And later, when I encountered in a biography, that little story of Tad Dameron's, I realized that once again, poetry was capable of taking me into regions where you know things that you don't really know somehow or other. My theory is that we are sending and receiving mechanisms, and we're largely unconscious, I'd say about 99%. So we're always astonished when we find out something that we didn't know, but there's a part of us that knew it all along. I can say things like that because I'm a poet, right? Get away with it. Another great jazz artist, Thelonious Monk. It was Monk who said that when you write a song, it shouldn't sound as though it had been composed. It should sound as if you just found it in the streets someplace. And he went out of his way to make these things just sound homemade. But he wrote a beautiful ballad called Ruby, My Dear. The melody line, doo-doo, Ruby, my dear, boom, doo, 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 doo. Ruby, my dear, Ruby, my dear, da 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 da. There aren't really words to it. I'm just making that up. And I was listening to it back in Michigan one night, outside Detroit, near the Huron River. And this is what came out. Ruby, my dear, Thelonious Monk, 1959. You are back again, re-entering the central train of trails, the quintessential USA of drowsy fields and sleepy fast food chains, the USA of nipped buds and layaways negotiated in harsh, flatland cracker accents. Surrounded by them, hemmed in, you sometimes feel a little like one of those brainy slicksters over at the federal penitentiary in Milan, Michigan. For, like them, you're locked up and keyed down. Ruby, my dear, comes drifting down Lake Huron in the saline marshlands of an eternal summer. The Midwestern night is steamy hot with mosquitoes. The air knotted and thick with gnats, like Monk's gracefully gnarled chordal clusters, notes and spiraling nodes, encoded, glistening like Milky Way encrusted swirls and specks of darkness. You know what you're hearing is human yearning and rushes of the divine, calling you home to all the Africanized galaxies in this shimmering island universe. Distances, another kind of blues, this longing. In the blues, you hear this cry, but you don't only hear it in the blues. If you follow world music, you hear it in just about all the musics of the world. Certainly you hear it in gypsy-derived music, such as flamenco. And I like to think that that's human beings who know that there's something big and magical going on here that we're missing out on. They want to get back to that somewhere or other. And so, in the deepest sacred idiom of music, that cry comes across. It came across in this poem. I was sitting at Heathrow Airport, coming back from London to San Francisco, and listening to the announcements for arrivals and departures. That's always a very romantic moment, because you'll hear something like, "It's the last call for Tangier. You have 3 minutes." And you think, I don't want to go to San Francisco. I want to go to Morocco. You know? Distances. To get to Tokyo from Istanbul, it's fun to travel when the weather's cool. To reach Madrid by way of Edinburgh, it might be best to leave from Glockamora. The Shangri-La you dream about comes close to meeting mute desire. An Ivory Coast, the Gold Coast of the past, fountains of youth. All colonies project a light from booths in darkened rooms of mind. A picture forms and moves again, and spills and warms spaces between the heartbeat and held breath. The distance anywhere, from birth to death, from sit to stand, from heat to holy snow, invents itself, unravels as you go. Blue Monday. My mother told me late, my mother died fairly young. She was 60 when she died, but we used to talk a lot about growing up. She opted to go to Mexico for Laetrile treatments. That was a fashion at that time in the 1980s when she died. It was a mistake, not in my view, but that's what she wanted to do. We talked about everything, and the blues came up, and she said, I always try to protect you kids from the blues. She says, the mild blues, Charles Brown, people like that, fine. But she said, I'm old enough to remember the real blues, which was always rough and not really respectable. So this pays debt to that. Blue Monday. The blues blow in their purity more than minds. Blues blow through every sky and haunted heart afloat. They say, I miss you, baby, So I really went out and got drunk. Blues say, fool that I am, I jam you in my toaster, burning brown like bread on fire, blackening in the afro-red Cadillac flame of love. Blues say, baby, you're supposed to be. Blues say, you're supposed to be so big, so bad, so slick, quick. Tell me, what is the distance from your heart to your dick? That's what my mother was protecting me from, right? Who I am in twilight. Like John Lee Hooker, like Lightnin' Hopkins, like the blues himself, the trickster sonnet, hoedown, the tango, the cante hondo, like blessed spirituals and ragas custom made, like sagas, like stories, like slick, slow, sly soliloquies, sliding into dramas, like Crime and Punishment, like Death and Birth, Canal Street, New Orleans, like the easy, erasable, troubled voices of a whirling ceiling fan. Let me read that line again. Like the easy, erasable, troubled voices a whirling ceiling fan makes in deep summer nights in hot, unheavenly hotels. Oklahoma, Arkansas, Tennessee, like the Mississippi River so deep and wide you couldn't get a letter to the other side. Like Grand Canyon, like Yosemite National Park, like beans and cornbread, like rest and recreation, like love and like. I know we last. I know our bleeding stops. Let's just keep going on. I've got stuck on these pages here. In February of last year, 2007, the State Department invited me to go to Austria, to Vienna. And February, of course, is Black History Month, and they actually observe that in different parts of the world now, not just in the United States, whatever black means, in a given locale. And the Friday before the Saturday departure, I was sitting at my desk. It was all packed. I reached where my passport holder should be, and it wasn't there. And I couldn't believe it. And I thought, oh, it must have strayed around the desk. Well, summarily, I searched my entire apartment, was unable to locate it. And I ended up having to cancel the trip because there was no way I could get a passport in 24 hours. So I called and bailed out. And at the hour, about noon, as I recall, the plane would have been leaving SFO. I sat down at the keyboard and wrote this poem. Lost Passport Blues. Travel never was what it used to be, nor is to be or not to be a question Buddhists can tackle, much less crack. At dawn, you wake up knowing you will not make the flight. Your geese are cooked. You've lost it. Your passport, the document that cements your departures and arrivals, your exits and entrances. You're passing through doors the way voyeurs see through stone and gut. Vienna, with her stately elegance, will not see you today, nor will she see you Monday, an American holiday, President's Day. To sunlight risen up and over trees and California dances, breezeways, you dedicate this morning. Poetry winks. Who knows where your sacred passport has traveled on its own, to what as yet unknown locale? Before Columbus cut his deal with the crown of Castile, who was lost? Who discovered what or whom? Bottom lines still dangle on the buy and sell of it. Passport? Rude explorers declare, we don't need no stinking passports. Travel never was what it used to be, nor is the here and now. There's a follow-up to that story. Several months later, in August actually, I was going through a clean clothes hamper in my apartment, and there at the bottom of it was my passport. And I reconstructed the story. I'd been at the laundromat folding clothes and paying bills, and I had left that particular portfolio at the bottom of this hamper, thinking when I put the clothes away, I'll get my passport out. But I never put those clothes away because I have too many clothes and had too many trips to take in between. Let's go over to a poem that mentions Buddhism again. I'm not, strictly speaking, a Buddhist, but I live in the atmosphere of Buddhism in the Bay Area. The Latin phrase arte poetica, the art of poetry, is something that every poet comes to deal with sooner or later. In other words, you are destined to write a poem about poetry itself, which is weird and sort of convoluted, but everybody does it. And this is what that poem actually is. This poem actually is. Now, it comes from, the germ of this goes all the way back to 1979, when there was a record called Convoy that hit the charts, and it was a popular record that really publicized citizens band radio. There was a madness that most of you are too young to know about that hit, you know about it. In the 1980s, everybody was dealing with citizens band radio, which up until then had been confined to commercial and governmental traffic. It's the citizens band. Truckers would use it, and law enforcement people would use it, but suddenly citizens were on there. And I never got involved with it except to listen. I had a receiver. I never transmitted things. But I picked up a conversation, one side of a conversation one night, where a woman in San Jose was talking to someone whose responses I couldn't hear, but she was saying to him, "You say you're a Buddhist, huh? Well, tell me this, are you wearing boots?" Which I got a big kick out of. And so years later, these things gestate, and then years later, something comes out. The Buddhist way out west reflects on boots. The loveliness of poems is that they keep. The loveliness of lives is that they don't. The rising tide one-ups the tide that falls, almost. You come to me in nothing but boots and body-mind. Here, blue matches everything you wear or even think in this improvised December of cold feet, a wrinkling cold, twice iced, now tough as lust. Your soulful earrings blue goes smoothly with the blurred blue of our clouded afternight. Up one-way streets, desire has sniffed us down and wired us to this alternating force for keeps. And yet, who knows what anguished tide will swoop tomorrow up and take us out? So quickly, even poetry, our tree root deep identity, can't ride time's wave unthrown. The mystery of love can't hide for long either. Come, melt my night. Forget today. Let tides and lives be on their drunken way. Peel off your sea and sky-dyed duds. Unstrap your blues and stay a while. But don't you touch them boots. That's it. Well, it's almost de rigueur that I have to read this poem. It's called Conjugal Visits. When Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger was making up his mind about which of 4 nominees he was going to designate Poet Laureate, this was in 2005, he had me out to the smoking tent. He has a tent on the grounds of the Capitol where he can smoke his cigars because he can't legally do it in his office in the Capitol. And in the course of that conversation, he quoted some lines from the poem you're about to hear and explained to me that he knew that I'd be surprised that he liked a poem like this, but he too was for prison reform. I didn't know what he meant at that time. I know what he means now. The poem is called Conjugal Visits, and the phrase, of course, some of you might be familiar with. There are societies actually that allow such things for spouses to visit their confined lovers, or I put that in a funny way, for people to visit each other conjugally in prison. In Sweden, prisoners go home on the weekend and then come back in on Monday. Can you believe that? Every time we want to talk about the United States, we always go to Sweden and say what they do. But there was a time when at San Quentin, it was in the 1980s, they were experimenting with conjugal visits. And I had a student at UC Santa Cruz who had a husband who was locked up. And she would excuse herself once a month to go to visit him, explaining to me that she wouldn't be in class because it was conjugal visiting day at the Q. Now, this is what I meant about poetry and its ability to talk about more than one thing at once. And it's why the poet is often beheaded in some societies, because rulers fear poets who have a lot of power because they got language as their instrument. They're capable of working a lot of magic. I was listening to NPR this morning, and they were saying that since 1983 or 1984, college tuition has increased 425%. I think that's the figure that they gave. Stanford tuition, I think now is about 40 grand a year. It costs on average to keep a man or woman locked up in a California prison $50,000 per person. And California has more prisons than any other state. You've read about that. So many that we've been shipping them out to other states to house them. So this poem is about all of these things at once. Conjugal visits. By noon, we'll be deep into it, up reading out loud in bed, or in between our making love, I'll paint my toenails red. Reese say he got to change his name from Maurice to Malik. He think I need to change mine too. Conversion, so to speak. I ain't no Muslim yet, I say. Besides, I like my name. Kamisha still sounds good to me. I'll let you play that game. I'd rather play with you, he say, than trip back to the 60s. The 60s, eh? I'm on his case. Then I won't do my striptease. This brother look at me and laugh. He know I love him bad, and worse, he know exactly how much loving I ain't had. He grabbed me by my puffed up waist and pulled me to him close. He say, I want you in my face or on my face, Miss Toes. That's what it says here. What can I say? I'd lie for Reese, but I'm not quitting school. 4 miles to feed, not counting mine. Let urban studies rule. I met him in the want ads. We fell in love by mail. I say when people bring this up, wasn't no one up for sale. All these black men crammed up in jail, all this IQ on ice, while governments, bank presidents, the mafia don't think twice. They fly in dope and make real sure their hands stay nice and clean. The chump change Reese made on the street, what's that supposed to mean? For what it costs the state to keep you locked down, clothed, and fed, you could be learning Harvard stuff and brilliant skills. I said. Reese say, just kiss me one more time, then let's get down, make love, then let's devour that special meal I wish they'd serve more of. They say the third time out's a charm. I kind of think they're right. My first, he was the ace of swords, which didn't make him no knight. He gave me Zeus and Brittany. My second left me twins. This third one ain't about no luck. We're honeymooners, friends. I go see Maurice once a month while Moms looks after things. We'd be so glad to touch again. I dance, he grins, he sings. When I get back home to my kids, schoolwork, the copy shop, ain't no way Reese can mess with me. They got his ass locked up. So she has solved all her problems and needs, I suppose you could say. I'll read a couple more, and do we open up for exchange here? Yeah. Oh, okay. All right. This is a poem called Blues My Naughty Poetry Taught Me. And it was written while sitting on an Amtrak train. And I think it was coming from Seattle back into Emeryville, or something like that. And so it's done in takes. Take one. How much of you was raised in jazz-fed otherness? And how much did Thelonious Monk and loneliness compose you like a thoughtful bass solo melting on ears that shone when they listened to the world slowed down in chromatic tones so inviting, you sometimes wonder the childhood you spent dreaming to drummers dreaming. 2. In a country so contrary with nobody on drums, just a drum machine, can you dance with any sincerity, much less to Otis Redding's Security? Who's on bass? Anybody home? Does anybody ever get to first? How does a kiss get you anywhere? 3. In parking lots, our kisses counted big. You knew the scores. You kept me up. 4. When blues songs drift aloft, there's no telling where anything is going. UK accents turn North American. Nigerian Delta thoughts get versed in oil. To ask that you be touched with love is all that ever matters. If you'd ever played Beth Orton's oddly bluesy Touch Me With Your Love for Miles Davis, he would have made her $1 million. As it was, he recorded time after time and made a whole lot of money for Cyndi Lauper. Miles had an ear for young women like Lauper, Laura Nyro, and others who wrote and phrased with feeling. And 5. Mind games and thoughts of time drifted. I'm sorry, that's interesting. Let's do that line again. Mind games and thoughts of time differed in the 18th, 19th, 20th centuries when space was open like wounds and minds were razored. Hot lost trails of consciousness, windows, winter, what star do you think you are? French clouds, French blue, language gauges this, your swiftest kiss. Jellyfish pink, squid ink sweet. Sea fences, industrial washed-ups, slushy tracks and rickety light, skies so soulfully watercolored you'd have to be an arts commissioner not to see it. Seen across the bay through trees and the undersides of freeways, San Francisco looks lonely at the end of one bridge and the beginning of another. Rainy train, gray Amtraks got me funneling poetry, channeling prose. Poetry and blues and jazz, you've handed me the key to every heart you ever captured or held spellbound. And I will conclude with the title song, or the title poem, which is called Something About the Blues. It opens with an epigraph, a quote from my good friend, the poet, novelist, essayist Ishmael Reed. When was the last time you saw a dog eat a dog? When men invented the term bitch, they were talking about themselves. Something about the blues. Something about the blues that catches way down in the throat of Howlin' Wolf or Taj Mahal, that tingled the nipples of Dinah Washington and Leontine Price. Something about the blues can drive a good woman mad, make her give up and take up shopping carts to push the homeless streets and die without the dignity of a dog. Something about the blues can also cauterize the wound that wobbles around the winded world like a hula hoop. Something about the blues swoops down on you so soft and easy that the slippery salt seam that sows sleep to wakefulness melts down to let love pour out all over you like radiation. Something about the blues tunnels through you straight up to the bottom of all that oils. Something about the blues makes a billionaire tremble when she knows she stands to lose $500 million. Something about the blues looks back at you, an ancient star creature, every time you stare into the night sky from a place uncompromised by urban light leak. Something about the blues belongs where sound leaves off and light takes up the spectral hum. Something about the blues would sooner draw blood than breath in this fragile century that streams out beyond total horror. Something about the blues outlasts the subtle electricities the science of our time has yet to find, much less map or capture or comprehend. Something about the blues curls around the world like a Yankee-sized question mark. Something about the blues makes you wonder, if you still wonder, if you still dream, what's taking Earth under. Thank you. Or A and Q. It was James Baldwin, the great late writer, who said that the purpose of all art is to lay bare the questions which have been hidden by the answers. So everything is always up for re-examination, for grabs. So you might answer some things.
Well, I'm not sure if I have a question that's deserving of that.
Okay.
First of all, thank you for coming out.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
I'm wondering how often is it that you can sit down and decide I'm going to I'm going to pull some poetry out of whole cloth out of my head now, and versus you're walking, you see something catches your eye, you make a connection, and and the poem just tumbles out.
If you're a practicing writer, meaning if you're writing all the time, which I do, I don't feel right unless I get something written in the course of a day, you'd be amazed at how fluent you become at grabbing that whole cloth out of the ether. It happened last night. I ran across something I'd scribbled in a notebook and realized I got goosebumps. I said, "Ooh, let's work on this a little bit," and it just took a few minutes to get it into shape. So there's always this thrill of discovery, of just hearing this voice or feeling this pulse, and trying to puzzle it out and get it into some kind of language that can be conveyed to others. It's hard to explain it, but it's not as mysterious as it seems. I think that, what was his name? The Canadian surgeon, brain surgeon who got the Nobel Prize. Does anybody think of what that guy's name is? At any rate, he said that if he were to do it all over, have it to do all over again, he would devote his life to the study of human attention. And I think that's the distinction there. When you're fixated on something, and I know many of you know this, you're working here at Google, you got a certain area of inquiry or problems that you're working with constantly. You just become very good and very attenuated at doing that. And so I'm always on the alert for poetry. I hear people say things, or I mishear people say things, and that's good enough. I'm often running Anything at all? This is your chance. No? I must say this about Google, because I maintain my own website. Without Google, I'd be a goner. And I've learned to use Google in very interesting ways that I'm not sure that anyone else knows about, but I can actually trick Google into finding exactly what I want to find. And it was so nice today to be talking with Chris. I thought it was Chris. I didn't trust myself though. Talking with Chris, who says he's into search quality, and he says, "I know that's an odd phrase." I said, "Not at all. I understand exactly what you're talking about." But Google has just been sort of a godsend in freely associating and coming up with lots of things that have to do with website content and just thought. I'm attuned enough that I can, if I'm looking for something, an image or something that will complete a poem, I can find it readily on Google. So I remember that several years ago, Google itself said that one of the 10 most accessed words in the search engine was poetry. I don't know if it's probably not true today, but I retain that. And I like to tell poets when I'm teaching them that poetry is that important, that people are always sort of searching around for poems on Google. Yes.
Can you describe, was there an aha moment for you where you knew this was what you were going to do and what you were meant to do? Or
Yes.
What was it?
I learned to read at the age of 3, and that caused all kinds of mischief because it was in a setting that was pretty rural. This is in Mississippi in a village called Pachuta, which was a farming village with no electricity and no running water at that time in the 1940s. So that the combination of hearing people tell stories, because in those kinds of settings, talk and conversation is very important. There were people in my community, for example, who could recite the Old and New Testaments by heart. And I didn't find out until I was grown that they couldn't read. Somehow they had memorized the Bible, that kind of thing. So I was always fascinated at the world of text, which is what we're really devoted to, and the world of the spoken word, that kind of storytelling and that kind of exchange. And I knew when I got into school and started editing, I think in the, 3rd grade, the school paper. I always was working on the school paper or magazine, and I saw my name in print so often before I got to college that by the time I got to the University of Michigan, I was a writer as far as I was concerned because I had all this, had all these things with my name on it. So the aha moment was stretched out a little bit, but I knew probably at about age 6 that was what I wanted to do because I was always trying to do it, and it was terrible. But you get, you keep doing something, you get better.
The mic. Thanks so much for coming out today. I really appreciate it. And my question is about spaces that you work. Is there anywhere in particular that you go to find compositions laying there in the street?
Oh, no, just absolutely everywhere. I'm always interested, because I get to travel a lot, I'm always in brand new situations, and sometimes situations that aren't really commodious. And one of the most interesting examples of that was on my first trip to India in the early 90s. I arrived at Hyderabad in the middle of the night. I mean, the plane came in, it was late, came in at about 1 o'clock in the morning, and there was this grudging guy picking me up, and he didn't like Americans. I didn't blame him. The Gulf War had just started at that time. He threw me in the back of a pickup truck. He didn't speak any English, and he drove me to this place, and I had no idea where we were going. There was no moon or anything like that. Took me into this room and says, "You stay here." And I didn't know where I was, and the toilet didn't work, and there was mosquito netting and just all of that. Had no idea where I was. Well, I was at the University of Hyderabad, and I was awakened a couple hours later, by the call to prayer, because it's a Muslim area. And someone knocked at my door and said, "You got to get up. It's time to get up." And I was thinking, "Oh, this is awful." But within about 3-4 hours, I really liked it. And every night we would sing songs. People would sit around with their guitars and instruments and would would sing things. And on nights when I couldn't be there, I had engagements to be out speaking or something like that. I'd come back and all of these students would be, so we've been waiting for you, this kind of thing. So I spent about a week there, and it was just an absolutely exquisite time because I got to know, some things about Indian music and Indian culture, and have them translate songs. And always there was a religious, or often there was a religious motive to the song. This was at a time when the big, one of the #1 hits in the United States was Brenda's Got a Big Old Butt, So I was contrasting these cultures with each other. So I think that old saw is true. It says there's no uninteresting subject, just writers who aren't interested in writing about it. But just anything that you get into, if you've got language as the mediator, you can really make it interesting. Well, thank you. This has been wonderful.